Welcome to Issues of Contemporary Politics with Dr. Brovkin. Today's presentation is devoted to the Baltic republics. I received many letters and comments concerning various aspects of contemporary issues and politics. Most of my videos in the past couple of years were actually focused on Ukraine, but today I'd like to talk about the Baltics. So it is the Baltic republics, the past, the present, and the future. The past. Obviously, the story of contemporary Baltic history starts with the year 1940, when they were occupied by the Soviet troops in result of the infamous agreement in the what is called Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact or Stalin-Hitler Pact, according to which the Baltics were assigned to the sphere of influence of the Soviet Union. Now, this historic event, of course, is the center point of contemporary awareness of the history in the Baltics. It's the sort of the year terrible where the Soviet troops came in and started deportations of the elites on these republics. So various estimates, there are 45,000, 70,000. The point is that anybody who was somebody was deported to Siberian camps, such as policemen, government officials, businessmen, etc., etc. Now, what these people today do not mention, and they call it the Russians did it to us. The Russians did it. Now, this is a substitution that occurred. It was not the Russians who did it, but it was the Soviets, which means it was NKVD. It was a secret police, or nothing secret about it. It was a political police, a murder machine of Comrade Stalin. Now, what is exactly important to mention here is that these people were deported not because they were Estonians, Latvians, or Lithuanians. There was no ethnic component to these deportations. They were deported because they were capitalists, because they were servants of the bourgeois state machine. Now, what difference does it make? It makes big difference because the same procedure was done to the Russians. In other words, anybody who had been at any point involved in any government officials in the Tsarist or provisional government regimes were killed, deported, systematically eliminated, exterminated by the Stalinist regime. And so the point is that there are millions of Russians had been deported to Siberian camps, including absolutely innocent kulaks, whose only fault was that they were private entrepreneurs. In other words, these people were not discriminated against because they were who they were by ethnicity, but because who they were by class. And that also means that there were many Latvians who were in the secret police service, and there were many government officials and generals and others who were Estonians or Lithuanians. In other words, the hit that these countries received was not based on ethnicity, but based on Soviet communist class policy. Now, so this is about the past. Now, the industrialization after the war is an essential part of the same communist approach, which means they believed in workers. They somehow fancied that workers would support the communists, which is nonsense. Workers did not. And so they started industrialization of the Baltics, just as they did industrialization of Russia. And they started building factories and ports and facilities. And there were like huge factories built. Latvia, I think, produced these 95% of all Russian electric train cars, and many others. I'm not going to go through the list. The point is, industrialization became this sort of standard policy for the Baltics. With the industrialization came immigration, because there were Russian workers who came in to work in these factories, and there were these pockets of Russian-speaking populations in the Baltics. And especially it was in Riga and surrounding area in Latvia, because it was a national resort with the coast and the millions of people coming to Riga and the Riga coast during the summer. Now, fast forward to the year 1990, on the eve of collapse of the Soviet Union, they were fairly developed republics. There was industry. There was actually more developed than Russia itself. In my youth, lived in Leningrad, USSR, and almost every weekend, as students, we used to go to Tallinn on a train. It was a night train, and then you come and you have to spend a wonderful weekend in Tallinn, and it was called at that time Our Little Abroad, which means everything was cleaner, fancier, more well kept, better stocks. In other words, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania were not sort of downtrodden, undeveloped colonial pit holes as they may seem to be, since they were colonized by the Russians. No, they were actually quite prosperous, in fact most prosperous of all Soviet republics, and quite desirable place to live. So this is on the eve. Now, I also should mention that in the year 1988, I came with my students as an American professor to Tallinn and Moscow and St. Petersburg, but I had conversations with very, very high-ranking officials in the democratic fronts, which were clamoring for independence. And it was, when I talked to them, I had the impression they were quite confident that in a couple of years they were going to get their independence. And when I asked them, what were you going to do with the Russian populations in your republics, the answer was it would be fairness, it would be integration, it would be equal rights, it would be respect to the Russian language, and we would remain, I quote, good neighbors and friends. So this was the way it was perceived to be. Moreover, and this is something the contemporary leaders of the Baltics forget, and that is that in 1990 there were huge demonstrations in Moscow and in St. Petersburg, at that time still Leningrad, which were under the slogan, "For your freedom and ours." Russian intelligentsia, Russian democratic movement was in favor of granting independence of the Baltic republics, and worked hand in hand with their democratic movements in order to put the end to the Soviet system and to the rule of the Communist Party, and to proclaim freedom for you and for us. Now, for some reason they forgot this, and now they talk about the Russians as if they are some kind of enemy. And they forgot that they got their independence simply because people in the democratic movement in Russia supported them and made it an ultimatum to Yeltsin to accept the reality that they would be independent. In other words, let's move on to the present, and by present I mean from 1991 to the present, to the current day, and then the future. I will talk about the prospects for future development of these republics. Now, the most important aspects of what we can call the present, and that is the development from 1991 to 2023, is number one, deindustrialization. Now, at first, the leaders of the Republic actually welcomed it because they equalized deindustrialization with de-Russianization, which means that, oh, we close down all these factories, all these workers are going to go home. So deindustrialization was a consciously pursued policy. Also was encouraging small enterprises and agriculture over industry. All of that were policies pursued specifically to Latvianize or Estonianize or Lithuanianize their republics and return it to the commanding position in their republics. At the same time, there was this totally obvious discrimination of the Russian population. There was banning of Russian schools, there was banning of Russian language, exactly the opposite of what they promised me in 1988. The Russian schools are systematically closed, Russian language is not allowed to be official language in any. And then there's a new category which doesn't even exist in the enlightened countries of Western Europe, which is called non-citizens. Now, these are people who used to be Soviet citizens who did not, for one reason or another, acquire acquire Latvian, Lithuanian, or Estonian citizenship, and they're just kind of tolerated there. Mostly older people who have no capacity to learn a foreign language, which is required of them. Now, in France, for example, if you want to be naturalized as a French citizen over the age of 70, you're not required to pass the French language. Now, there's no such thing as Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. Older people, without exception, must learn foreign language. If they can't get it, then non-citizen. That's the solution. Now, as a result, what you have had in these decades that passed, you have Russian ghettos. People who live there are mostly poor, mostly a lot of them unemployed, a lot of them are pensioners, and they have nowhere to go. And their apartments are deteriorating. They're worth pretty much nothing. And even if they wanted to sell them and move to Russia, that their apartments are worthless and they have no money, and there's nowhere to go, and nobody's particularly welcoming them in Russia either. It's quite a bureaucratic procedure to repatriate to Russia, which is something that was raised in the Russian media many times. So the result is that they're kind of stuck, and the choices that the local government made make it pretty much impossible for this issue to be resolved. And now we're talking about the future and the very dangerous trends that the Baltics faces. Before I turn to the future, let me just say one thing about my playlists. The point is that it's very easy to find almost anything if you know and look at the playlist. I have a playlist on Ukraine war with all the videos about Ukraine and Ukraine history and war is there. You have a history in Russia under the communist regime. I have a playlist on World War II, fascism and Nazism. I have a playlist of Russian history with Dr. Brovkin, and of course AP European history in chronological order. So anything from Renaissance to the present you can find in those playlists. Okay, now I come back very briefly to the future prospects of the Baltics, and they are quite dismal. Which is that the catastrophic demographic trends in the Baltics. Now, these are pretty bad trends all over Europe. There is kind of decline of fertility and low birth rates and high number of older people. All of that is present in Europe. It's quite disturbing for many countries, including the most bad, according to the worst, according to Eurostat, is Portugal, and Italy is 1.3 children per a mother. So all these are common European trends, but in the Baltics it's worse. It's worse than anywhere else, partly because of the choices that were made by the leaders of the country. Number one choice, discriminate against the Russian population, which did not decrease because they have nowhere to go, because nobody welcomes them, because they cannot be integrated, because even if you learn Latvian, you still would be discriminated against in Latvia, and there's no point. You're not going to make any career. It's much better to learn English or Russian and move somewhere where you could be pretty much have equal rights. So, but the worst thing for the Baltics is the immigration of younger people. And that is what's happening because of the Schengen open borders, and simply because they pay more in the West. And so that means that taxi drivers go from Riga to London, and then the workers, menial workers, unqualified workers can get much more money if they move to Finland or Sweden or Germany, and so on it goes. And especially the elites, the children of prime ministers and ministers and others are all, check it out, are either in Germany or in Britain or some other West European country. So the youth, the skilled workers, and anybody who has any education, engineers, doctors, they leave because they can get better pay in West European countries. That's a common problem to many East European countries. The young people and the talented ones are leaving. Now, I visited with my students a couple of years ago Tartu University, and the only thing thing you see there is prospects of further study or further employment in Germany, not in Estonia. So the young are leaving, the older people live longer, and the Russians are stuck there because they have nowhere to go. And in the end, what you have is a situation, this is the opposite of what the leaders of the Baltics wanted in 1991. They wanted to get rid of Russian and to have the Russians and have a prosperous republics allied with Western Europe. What they got is that they are the backwater of the Western Europe. They have decaying populations. They have young ethnic titular nationality leaving their republics for better jobs and opportunities, and they're stuck with the Russians who they wanted to get rid of, but who stay there because they have nowhere to go. So that's the situation in the Baltics. And finally, the last thing, which is new trends. And this is something that nobody actually speaks about, and I am beginning to make you all aware of the new trends. And the new trends is that it used to be that there was a total Western orientation of everybody. Everything's better in the West. We want to be like the West. We want to go to the West. The West was the centerpiece of all the dreams and aspirations of the elites in the Baltics, and also to a certain extent in Russia itself from the 1990s on. Now we have a new reality, and the new reality is that if you compare Vilnius or Tallinn or Riga to St. Petersburg or Moscow, you would realize that the difference is in favor of St. Petersburg and Moscow. They're prosperous. There's prosperity everywhere. As Tucker Carlson noticed, there are cafes, there are theaters, there's booming industries, there's no unemployment, there are new job opportunities. And so Russia is now beginning to be, for the first time, mind you, from 1913, Russia is beginning to be a magnet of economic prosperity and opportunity. And so now the Baltic republics saw the West as something that is much, much more attractive. Now, with the decline of Europe and the rise of Russia and China, you have Russia becoming a new magnet that maybe someday the Baltics are going to reconsider as a place to restore normal relations. Thank you and goodbye until next time.